Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free series review of The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. I don't have book 4 because I read it on audiobook. This is a 4-book YA paranormal fantasy series, and it follows a group of friends in a small town in Virginia of Henrietta, and they are all seeking a dead Welsh king. So the 4 boys are the titular Raven boys. They attend a very prestigious academy locally that refers to the boys as like Raven boys. Ravens are the school logo, but it also ties into the fact that the Raven king is the king that they are seeking, etc., etc. And they end up pulling one of the local girls, Blue, into the mix because she is from a magical psychic family, but she does not have psychic ability of her own beyond being able to amplify other people's abilities. So she ends up kind of crossing paths with them because they're a group of kind of magical boys as well, as we learn over the series, and everything kind of goes from there with them on their quest. So all that synopsis might sound very like plot action focused, this series overall is not plot driven. This is a very character and atmosphere centered series, and that is why it's such a hard series to explain. There's a lot of things about the synopsis I left out because ultimately a lot of that stuff isn't super important. It's really about, are you going to like the atmosphere and the characters? Because if you like those things, then you're going to like the series most likely. So first off, I'm going to talk about the world building. This series is incredibly atmospheric. The town of Henrietta is almost like its own character, so you feel just this sense of sort of like unease and that magic is around every corner, because in this world it kind of is, but it's not a magical realism story. It's just that Henrietta is on a ley line, which is very similar to like Buffy and being on a hellmouth, although not quite as bad, although sometimes kind of bad. It's up in the air. But that makes it kind of a center of magic and magical activity, but most people in the world don't know about magic, so it's not like a magical realism type thing where everyone just takes it for granted. It's just like other people don't really see it, but these kids kind of get into this like magical quest that kind of opens up magic to a lot of them. Some of them came in with magic and some of them didn't, but it ends up kind of enveloping their whole lives, and that's the atmosphere of the story and just the like setting of this like sleepy small town that has something going on underneath that all these kids are involved with but like no one else really knows about. And Maggie Stiefvater does a really good job with like description and stuff. Some people think it's overly flowery. I liked it. I think it really worked for the story, but you can just feel the setting completely, both when I was reading it in physical books and when I was reading it in an audiobook, because half the series I read in physical copy and half I read in audio. So either way, I just felt immersed in it from the beginning. Next, I'm going to talk about the characters. I think the characters are absolutely the highlight of this series. Even small, minor characters feel fully fleshed out and real, and that says something because the fandom for this series, if you're involved at all in like Tumblr or anything where like the fandom is around for this series, they analyze the smallest little minor characters as if they were main characters, because that's how this series makes you feel, like connected to almost everyone, that they're all so interesting and they all have like this giant backstory, like they all feel like they're existing outside of this story, that they have this like grand life. And the series also has a way throughout where it kind of makes you feel like this could be any of their stories. I mean, we just so happen to be watching Blue and the boys, but it could really be about any of them. You could center any of them as the main character in the story, and that includes like some of the adults and stuff, so that's really cool, and I really enjoy the characters in here. What's really great, especially about that core group, is that they're a group of teenagers that all really love one another. Like, their platonic bonds are really strong. When there are romantic bonds, they're very strong, and like everybody is very close-knit, and that's even true with some of the other characters as well. So for example, Blue's family that she's from, it's kind of like this found family group of women kind of thing. They're not related, but they all have very close bonds as well. I would like a story or a whole series about the adult women in her home that are all psychic. I love them. They're like their own girl gang. So everyone you just feel really invested in because they're so invested in one another, and I can't even pick a really, like, a favorite character in the series because the character, like, my favorite always changes. My favorite minor character always changes. My favorite side character always changes. My favorite of, like, the Raven boys always change. Like, I can't even really say who's a favorite because they're all my favorites for different reasons, and being that attached to all of them is really cool because this has a pretty big cast of characters. It's third person, so it's not like you are in their heads and it gets really muddled with, like, multiple POVs or anything, but you are just like really invested in all of them and in their relationships with one another, which is interesting because you would think that with this like fantasy paranormal plot that you'd just be like, get back to the plot. not really. Like, whenever they got onto the plot stuff, I'm like, can we get back to the characters just like hanging out and like driving around and drinking tea or something? Lastly, I'm going to talk about the plot. The plot is definitely the weakest part of the story. The characters in the atmosphere are really strong, and I feel like Maggie Stiefvater just wanted to write that and these characters like interacting, and then she's like, oh wait, I have to put a plot with it. Because the plot is just kind of like messy at times. The pacing is an issue with this series because for almost all of the books, like, it's very kind of slow, character-driven, their interactions, slow, slow, slow. And then the last, like, fourth is like, let's do all the plot stuff really, really quickly. And you're like, whoa, like, calm down. Like, and that gets a little bit better. Like, the first book is really like that. And it gets a little, but that's kind of a theme throughout the whole story. And I feel like that's the theme of the overarching arc of the whole story is, like, it's just kind of like meandering, and then it's like, bam, at the very end. So there's a lot of like plot points that aren't really fully explained. A lot of things are kind of like dropped in at the end, stuff like that that I feel like could have been much stronger. I feel like a lot of the, again, like the foreshadowing for characters and character interactions is there and solid. Foreshadowing more so for the plot, not so much. This also has an interesting like antagonist of the week feel, kind of like a monster of the week feel on some shows. And that was something that I wasn't quite expecting. There isn't, like, each book kind of has its own antagonist. Some of them kind of fall over into the next book, but not quite. So you have this, like, you don't quite have this, like, big bad feeling, necessarily. You could argue that there is a big bad, but, like, not really, because they don't really come in until much later, not like they're always in the background or anything. So that was an interesting thing. My favorite antagonist is in the second book. I will talk about that in my discussion that I will be doing of the full series. But that was weird because I felt like the antagonists weren't quite as strong as they could have been and probably should have been for like a paranormal series. I also feel like the plot in general just gets tied up way too easily, even like the overarching series plot. Again, I'm not really in it for the plot, so it wasn't super disappointing to me, but it was still like, there was so much at stake, and again, like with every fantasy conclusion that's YA, it doesn't do as much as it could have with it. I think it's much better than some other fantasy finales that I've read. I feel like it is much stronger just because of that whole like atmosphere, characters, and how strong they are, but the plot is just not as strong as it could have been potentially. There is going to be apparently a continuation series or a spin-off series featuring one of the other main characters, or a lot of them. It hasn't quite been announced as of the filming of this video, but I do plan on reading that series. This is not a series that I consider myself just like done with. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the atmosphere, and I really enjoyed the characters. So if this is a series that just continues and we keep following these characters, I'm going to keep following them because I'm very invested in them. So I would give this series as an overall arc 4 out of 5 stars. So for individual reviews of each book, I gave The Raven Boys 4 out of 5 stars. I gave The Dream Thieves 5 out of 5 stars, and it was my favorite in the series. I gave Blue Lily, Lily Blue 4 out of 5 stars. I listened to that one on audiobook. And I gave The Raven King 4 out of 5 stars, and also listened to that one on audiobook. So I am going to be doing a spoilery gush discussion on this whole series. It's probably going to focus a lot on The Raven King, but I mean the full series. So if you've read the full series and want my in-depth thoughts on it, I will link that on the screen. So comment below and let me know what you thought of the Raven cycle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!